The 1920s are often called the Roaring Twenties, and boy, they really lived up to the name. That decade truly was the bee's knees, the cat's meow, an era of indulgence of foot juice and flappers. And people had reason to kick up their heels. World War I had ended, the economy was on the upswing, and it saw the end to Prohibition. Let's go back a bit in time to understand the impact Prohibition had on the province. Alberta had been under a total prohibition of alcohol since 1916. That's when the Prohibition movement called for government intervention and the total eradication of liquor. Temperance organizations were active in Okotoks, including the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which called for an all-out prohibition. Members of the Temperance Union blamed alcohol for many of society's problems and saw it as the biggest single cause of domestic violence and divorce. Members believed that drink was ruining Canadians' physical health and linked alcohol to crime, sexual immorality, and poverty. In fact, the Okotoks chapter was so anti-alcohol that they held a contest to create their own rallying song. Mrs. Foreign of Okotoks won the contest. Okotoks had 3 hotels at the time, and for the most part, all 3 complied with their prohibition order. Ada Beaton's uncle, Dan MacDonald, ran the Alberta Hotel before and during Prohibition. Ada says, quote, "Before Prohibition, whiskey and other hard liquors were served over the bar. As I recall, no real man ever drank beer. It was only belly wash. But at Okotoks, where Prohibition was in force, and then when only 2% beer was allowed to be sold, Uncle Dan made a killing by means of bootlegging, or so the story goes." It was clear Prohibition wasn't working. During the era of Prohibition, secretive drinking holes, or speakeasies, emerged in dimly lit back rooms or basements accessible by trapdoors and coded knocks. There, residents could enjoy their bottles of homemade hooch or bootlegged booze. If the coppers came by, often tipped off by a stool pigeon in the midst, you could stash the bottles in hidden cupboards or under floorboards to avoid being thrown into the paddy wagon and hauled off to the slammer. A province-wide plebiscite was triggered by the presentation of a 56,000-name petition. Known as the 1923 Alberta Liquor Referendum, it was held on November 5th, 1923, and it was literally wet versus dry. There were 4 options to the referendum. Option A, prohibition, or staying dry, or 3 varying options of wet, including Option B, the sale of beer in licensed hotels, Option C, the government sale of beer, or Option D, the government sale of all liquor, including beer, wine, and spirits. The results of that plebiscite saw 58% of Alberta voters wanting the province to go wet, choosing Option D, allowing the provincial government to control liquor sales and to strictly regulate taverns. And how did Okotoks residents vote? The majority of residents living in Okotoks voted for Option A, which was to retain Prohibition, to remain dry. Okotoks had 2 polling stations. Okotoks East voted 96 to 85 for Prohibition, while Okotoks West voted 72 to 39 for Prohibition. Meanwhile, Black Diamond and Turner Valley residents voted strongly in support of going wet, as did the rural areas of Red Deer Lake, Priddis, Millerville, and Davisburg. No business welcomed the end of Prohibition as much as the hotels in Okotoks. They welcomed back customers to their bars, serving up cocktails like the Sidecar, the Mint Julep, and the Gin Ricky, and of course, beer. Especially the beer produced by the Calgary Malting and Brewing Company. In fact, that company had a very special relationship with Okotoks in the 1920s. The Grand Central Hotel, which had been built by the Patterson brothers in 1905, had sold in 1911, and it had changed ownership several times in the teens and early 1920s, finally being purchased by the Calgary Malting and Brewing Company. Structural problems, as well as a different vision by the new owners, resulted in it being torn down in 1928. The Willingdon Hotel was built in its place. This new hotel was built in a Spanish Revival style with stucco finish. It had 25 rooms, 3 suites, some with hot and cold running water, a dining room that could seat 32 guests, and a spacious beer parlor and a liquor license, which were very important in the 1920s. The Alberta and Royal Hotels did not recover from the toll Prohibition took. The Alberta's liquor license was transferred to the new Willingdon, and both the Royal and the Alberta were torn down in the 30s. But the Willingdon thrived, and the hotel, now known as the Royal Duke, serves as a legacy of those roaring 20s.